Hey, my nonprofit visionaries. It's Shalita, the Nonprofitista O'Neill. I'm back again. Hey, 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 hey. Today, I wanted to talk to you all about when do you know when you should hire a grant writer? I hear it all the time. A lot of my clients and my nonprofit visionaries, they post in the groups and they reach out and when do I need a grant writer? Or they automatically start asking for a grant writer and they're not quite sure, if they need one right now. Or typically, sometimes when you first start your nonprofit, that's the first thing that your mind goes to. Okay, how can I raise some money? And when we think about how can we raise the money, we typically assume that we should just jump out there with grant writing. Y'all know me, y'all know that I say that fundraising is not grant writing, or grant writing is not fundraising. It's a tool, an important tool. Don't get me wrong, because when I started my first organization, I had to write a lot of grants, but most times it was after I've already developed a relationship with a funder and they say, okay, well, we have a grant proposal process and we want you to submit for that. So grant writing is important. The grant proposal is important, but I want you to understand where it falls in line with priorities. So first, in trying to make a decision as to whether or not you truly need a grant writer, understand what is the process or what are the materials or requirements of the proposal that you're trying to apply for. What's the time requirements? So if it only takes you a few minutes or if it's not that involved, and typically if you're just getting started or you haven't been around for that long, the grant writing process is not, or the proposal that they're asking you to develop is not that time intensive. Typically, foundations will want to use a common grant application. So they typically have limited staff looking at different proposals. They may have a lot of proposals that come into them. So they like to simplify or streamline the process. So they call it the common grant application. I'll put a link to it for you as well as support. But it's straightforward. It outlines what your mission, your vision, your goals, your programming, your outcomes, how does it fit in line with their organization's outcomes, what's your budget going to look like. It's very simple, and if you have this information or this content already written up, which you should, whether it's on your website or whether you've been working with me and we worked on your one pager and you have that all together, it really is a copy and paste, cut and paste into the document. And of course, you want to check for flow. You want to make sure you're grammatically correct and how you're presenting your information. That goes without being said. But when you're getting started, the grant writing process is not that intensive. You shouldn't be trying to go for a federal grant, which is extremely intensive. That's something completely different. Once you get to that point of delivering consistent programming, you have data, you have evidence to back up your work, and you've got community partnerships and all of that, then it's worth hiring a grant writer for something like that. But if you're just getting started and first you want to go to your board. That's your tribe. I tell y'all all the time, don't forget about your board. See who's on your board that can help you draft up a grant proposal using a common grant application. And even if the potential funder isn't asking for a common grant application, if they're telling you, they tell you what they want, stick to it, you know, and keep it simple. So don't invest money in someone, in a grant writer, thinking that, oh, initially, especially if you have limited resources. Now, if you have a lot of money and someone, maybe a funder has given you specific dollars to help you with resource development and you can hire a grant writer to, write proposals and things like that, then by all means, do that if that works for you. But most of you are on limited funds and you have to be creative and you have to be smart about how you use your funds. So if you're just getting started, if that grant proposal or that request for proposal is not that in depth, then it's something that you and your board can work together to get done. So you don't need to bring in a grant writer. Just by rule of thumb, when you're trying to determine whether or not you need to bring in someone, look at what's the time commitment? What are they asking you for? How long is it going to take you to do this? What's the return on investment? Because you all know that as far as grant writing is concerned, if it's a new funder that you're reaching out to that doesn't know who you are, your chances of getting that funding is around 30%, give or take 30% of getting that. So you have to write a lot of grants in order to get some. You got to get a lot of no's before you get your yeses, which is not to discourage you, it's just to help you put it into perspective. Okay, if you are applying for a grant and you don't know these folks, it's the percentage of you getting that grant is significantly low. Now, if you're writing a grant and you already have a relationship or build up some sort of rapport with the funder, then your percentages goes up. It's around 90%, of you, the chances of you getting that grant, it increases. Now, if you're doing grant writing for both, new funders and existing funders that you have a relationship with, then the grant writing piece, then that goes up to about 50%. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about when can I engage a grant writer? Because, and I'll tell you, if you do decide to engage a grant writer, best practice, right? It's unethical to ask a grant writer to work for a percentage of the funding that you would get from that grant because a number of reasons. But one, you're not even sure if you're going to get the funding for that proposal, and that person is putting in work up front. So to ask them, any grant writer that has a track record, a success record, right, that's been around for a while, that's professional, they are not really going to want to take that deal, because it takes time depending on what kind of grant you're asking them to write and how many you're asking them to write. If you're saying, oh, well, we'll wait and see if we get this money, if we get this money, we will pay you a certain percentage. No, that's first, because they're already putting their work in up front, and that's not fair. Also, once you get funding, and if you get funding, most of these foundations do not want you to use it for fundraising professionals. So it's unethical if you say, okay, now we've got this funding and I'm going to go ahead and pay you a percentage of this money for the work you've put in, because 9 times out of 10, you've written that proposal based off of services that you're going to provide to a certain population, not to pay for fundraising support. So unless you are applying for a capacity building grant from a foundation, and that's very clear in your proposal, it's not expected that you are going to use the money from that proposal to pay someone who has written a grant for you. So we want to stay ethical here. I want to give y'all a heads up that if you're going to engage a grant writer, you need to have something in the budget to pay them. Now, what they will accept and what their rates are will be up to the grant writer, but be ready to pay them up front. Okay? Recap. When do you need to hire a grant writer? Well, again, make sure you look at what's the time commitment. What is the requirements of that grant proposal? What are they asking you to do? What is your percentage or your success rate of getting that grant coming in, that funding coming in? Will help you to determine whether or not you need to put resources aside and into paying a grant writer. Initially, first, go with your board, see who can help you, because I'm sure there's somebody on your board that has no problem with helping you draft up a proposal, understanding that if this is the type of proposal that, okay, they're only asking for a couple of pages, you don't need to waste your money. I'm just going to say, on someone to do that for you if you can have a board member or volunteer to do that for you. But if the process is very involved, then I'm going to do another video on grant writing, because there's levels to it, depending on how big you are as an organization and how big the funder is and what their requirements are for that proposal. So there's different levels to it, because sometimes you might need to put together a grant writing team. It's not just about one grant writer, it's a team. If you are in the big leagues and you are applying for some real serious cash, then it's not just one person that's going to be helping you and helping to pull this together and writing up the proposal. It should be a team. So really assess, what do you need? Because a lot of times when you're applying for grants that are maybe like $500, seed money, $2,500, and those grants add up to help you with your startup and with your seeded funds. I'm not knocking those grants at all. A lot of the conversations and the videos that I do are geared towards larger grants, but those smaller grants, you definitely do not need to hire somebody to help you with, because they're not asking you for a lot. Okay, so let's be smart about it. And if you do plan to bring on a grant writer, make sure you have money to pay them. Do not ask them. It's, according to the, what is it, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, right? So they're a large organization, a collection of fundraising professionals around the country, and they have ethics and they have standards. And one of those things is, okay, you don't not pay a grant writer and have their payment contingent on whether or not you get a grant or not. For those reasons that I listed, you may or may not get the grant, but they still do the work. And if you get the grant, the funders don't typically want you to use, they do not allow you to use that money towards paying a fundraising professional or a grant writer because you have specifically asked to use that funding for something different. So we want to stay ethical. I hope that was helpful for you all. Tune into the next video that I'll do when we start talking about there's levels to it. Okay, there's levels to this grant writing, but this here will get you started as to whether or not, Shalita, do I need a grant writer? You may not need one. Okay, and if you do, let's be smart about how you go about getting one. I am Shalita, the Nonprofitista O'Neill. Y'all know if you need one-on-one support with me, you need one-on-one coaching, you need some additional hand holding, reach out to me at shalitao'neill.com and let's see how we can get it started. Until next time, be blessed.